Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We have got Season 6, Episode 13, The Last Recruit tonight. Shit is getting serious.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes that doesn't really focus on any one character in particular. We're going to see what all sorts of people are up to, both on the island and off.
There is a lot to talk about, and we've also got Jean Higgins with us here today. She was one of the executive producers on Lost. You'll remember we had her on the show in Season 3. She's wonderful, and we were happy to talk with her again.
Let's get into it.
So we start every week with our hot takes, and I believe we've got one from a listener to share today about Jacob.
Here's something worth considering, because you were very hard on Jacob in previous episodes. So have you ever considered that maybe Jacob never had a choice in the things that he did? That he was just as much a pawn of fate as Jack and Locke and everyone else? Think about the logic of the story up to this point. There was a causality paradox with that time loop in Season 5, which means our Losties always appeared in different periods of the past, from Egyptian times to Dharma times and even beyond that. And their actions are weaved into the fabric of the island's history. Those actions cannot be unweaved. Whatever happened, happened, which means long before Jacob ever chose our candidates, or chose the Losties as his candidates, they'd already been on the island and affected history. When he touches Kate and Sawyer and activates them as candidates when they're children, their adult future selves have already popped up in the island's past. So what Jacob is seeing in those lighthouse mirrors is not necessarily of his own choosing. It's the island guiding him, the island as its own entity, and the Protector is an expression of the island's will, and it's guiding him in terms of who to target.
I gotta say, I've been complaining about Jacob a lot this year, which I think this is kind of in response to. I'm intrigued by this idea that maybe Jacob didn't have as much choice or as much agency as we give him credit for. That behind Jacob, there's the island kind of pulling these strings and putting him in a position where he's got no choice but to do certain things. I don't know if I fully agree or not, but I'm intrigued by the concept.
Yeah, it makes me think. We know, of course, that the Man in Black is trapped on the island and would like nothing more than to leave, but is Jacob also trapped on the island somehow? I mean, we know that he has been off island in order to recruit our candidates, right? But I wonder if it's possible that both brothers were sort of forced into, your lives are going to be about the island, whether you like it or not. And the Man in Black said, well, I don't like it, and I'm going to spend, many centuries rebelling against this, whereas Jacob said, okay, if you can't beat him, join him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a certain amount of sense and is also likely, if we're buying into this idea of the island as a, at least semi-omnipotent or conscious force. I mean, it goes back to can't have light without dark, right? Yin and yang. It's like, if the island is in some ways God in this scenario or some kind of godlike force or presence rather than Jacob himself, like, I feel like every religion has that conception that good and evil have both been put into the universe in some way, and that's intentional. So that does kind of make sense to me.
Yeah, and we have lots of examples in religious tradition of two brothers, one of whom is quote-unquote good and one of whom is evil, or one of whom sort of obeys the father and one who does not. And I wonder if it makes more sense to think about Jacob and the Man in Black as more of a Cain and Abel, or a Jacob and Esau than God and God's little brother.
I think so too, and maybe that's gotten lost in our conversations, but I do think that's the case. One thing I would say though is that, I mean, at least in the Bible, if you read the Bible with any sort of literalness, it's like you sort of know what God's intentions are. God is there, speaking out like, okay, here is why I'm doing this or that, or here's why I'm punishing this person in that way. With the island, as sort of God in this conception that we're discussing here, we've really got no idea what the island wants or why it's doing the things it's doing. We're kind of making our best guesses, but interpreted through the lens mostly of stuff that we've heard from Jacob or the Man in Black or their various disciples. And I imagine, again, if the island, really is some kind of guiding hand behind events here, like our interpretations of what the island is up to are probably pretty not too close to accurate a lot of the time.
Arguably, human interpretations of what God is up to are not necessarily always very accurate.
I mean, sure. Yes. Anyway, Rosie, what's your hot take this week?
This is pretty silly, but when we're on the island and Sawyer is, beginning to explain his plan to Hurley, and Hurley sort of argues for Saeed and Claire to say that, they can be saved, there's still good in them, etc. He says, just like Anakin. And Sawyer says, who is Anakin? And could you possibly have been Sawyer's age and not know who Anakin was? Look, I don't know if the listeners know this. I had not seen a single Star Wars film until March 2020, when I had suddenly many evenings to fill. I knew who Anakin was because that is culturally important. I guess maybe Sawyer had never seen the prequels if he ended up on the island in 2004.
Yeah, I
no,
guess
the first prequel
99,
definitely came out in 99.
But the third one came out in 2005, I think. But so I guess that's crazy that was that this was happening simultaneous.
Yeah. So maybe he never made it to theaters to see Hayden Christensen as Anakin. Not important.
I'm gonna raise you one here. I think I can attempt to offer an explanation for this, and that comes in another Sawyer line this episode that I had noted down, where when he and Kate are talking at the police station, which I think is a wonderful scene, which we can talk more about hopefully. Sawyer says to Kate, she's talking about how they met at the airport, and then he says,
"Well, don't you think it's weird? You and me being on the same flight, having that little meet up in the elevator, and a week later, boom, of all the cars in Los Angeles, you smash into mine."
Which I interpret as a Casablanca reference to the famous line from Casablanca, of all the gin joints.
Of all the gin joints in all the world.
In all the world, she walks into mine. So my explanation here is that Sawyer was so busy watching old movies and the classics that he just didn't have time for anything new. He knows his classic films, but didn't have time for Star Wars.
Plausible.
That's my explanation. Anyway,
what is your hot take about The Last Recruit?
So two characters that are just kind of in the background here that I'm just so kind of confused by what their roles are in this show that I want to spotlight. I know I've complained a little bit about Zoe, but I just it's so funny to me that this random Widmore henchman who is not a character in any way, shape, or form besides just being a person that exists to say lines, that she's playing such a prominent role in the end game of Lost. I'm just so confused why or how they couldn't have either used another existing character to, that we had more depth that we're already familiar with to do these dramatic scenes. Zoe comes out of nowhere and actually had no personality, and, not the actor's fault. But the other weird thing is in this episode, she's super intimidating. She walks into the camp and she's you have until nightfall to return what you took, or next time we won't miss, with the mortar fire coming in. It was literally 3-4 episodes ago that she was complaining to Widmore that he should have gotten a henchman rather than a geophysicist or a mercenary. She says to him, maybe you should put a mercenary in charge instead of a geophysicist. She's a scientist and now suddenly she's the intimidating henchperson. The character makes no sense. I'm just annoyed by Zoe's existence.
Yeah. This is on a related point, but I kept noticing in this episode how many extras there still are in the main on-island group. I assume these are folks who left the temple and decided to go with John back in Sundown, but it just feels so odd and so incongruous to be seeing these strangers' faces in the background of these shots when we know that there are only 5 episodes left.
Right, and when we know they're probably just going to get killed off in some, dramatic... They're there to be fodder for, violence.
Well, right, and because we're so focused on the end game, it's not even going to be sort of emotionally impactful to the viewer.
It's not. But so here's the other character I was going to bring up, and it builds on that, is Cindy. And Zach and Emma are still there, in the background.
Oh, you're right.
Which is so bizarre. Cindy was, the flight attendant on 815, and these 2 kids who are still hanging out with her were on the plane. And I guess that's supposed to add, emotional heft, we're supposed to care about them, but it's bizarre to me that they're still kind of hanging out in the background. And according to Lostpedia, the Lost Encyclopedia that was published after the show came out says that they survived the mortar fire attack in this episode and just go on living under Hurley's reign on the island. So I guess that's like semi-canon, but it's like, one, who cares at this point? Two, I mean, poor Cindy that Sawyer and Jack and Hurley hatching their plots, they never think about her and the kids. It's like, let's get everyone else who was on the plane off the island. I guess they just like being others at this point. I don't know, but it's weird. The whole thing is weird.
Yeah, I agree.
So anyway, now that we've complained about weird minor character things going on, let's talk about the main characters who we love.
So before we do that, I'm gonna take an approach that is very much your approach, which is to first offer my complaint, and then we can get into the good parts.
Okay.
This is one of those episodes. Remember last time we interviewed Damon Lindelof when he said, sometimes you just need to move all of the pieces into the place where they need to be for the end game to start. That's what I felt like was happening in this episode. Like, it had a couple of really interesting scenes and useful scenes, but to me it didn't have a lot of, like, I guess we got the resolution of Sun and Jin, sort of, at the end. They finally found each other, but it's like happening amid all of these plots and thwarted plots, and like 5 different people have betrayed each other at this point, and it just kind of gets overshadowed, I think, by trying to remember who is doing what and who is loyal to whom at any given moment. Just because there are so many pieces on this chessboard at this point. I wish there had been more space for some of those emotionally resonant moments.
I agree with some of that. I think you're definitely right about the Sun Jin scene, getting way overshadowed. Like, it's a beautiful moment, but right, it's like shoehorned in right before, this sort of dramatic mortar attack when, as we talked about, they should have put that scene in the package at the end of the package and giving them real satisfaction in their own episode. Like, it's the wrong place for that scene. And also Frank kind of cutting into the middle of the scene with his looks like she got her voice back. Like, yeah,
the Sun losing her voice plot was always goofy. We do not care about it. We don't need to remark upon it.
Right. We don't need their as fun as Lapidus always is. We don't need their reunion interrupted by like reminding us like, oh, okay, this is how she gets her voice back. Like, it's fine. So they kind of fucked up that scene, I hate to say. Overall, I actually really liked this episode. I agree with you that it's a lot of moving the pieces, into place. But I also thought, especially in the flash sideways, there was a really strong energy surrounding that.
Huh.
I don't know. I felt like, the Locke and Ben in the ambulance, Jack realizing he knows Locke at the hospital, the Jack-Claire reunion in the flash sideways, which was much more satisfying than the on-island one. Like, I don't know. Maybe the Giacchino score was really good in the flash sideways this week. I felt like it communicated a positive energy. And also, I just thought that there were a lot of really great one-on-one scenes this episode. Like, the Desmond and Saeed scene in the well, I thought was a wonderful scene. Jack and Sawyer on the boat, I loved. Like I said, Jack and Claire at the lawyer's office in the flash sideways. I thought there were just a bunch of really, really good. Jack and Locke at the beginning having their talk. I really liked the one-on-one moments in this episode. And you're making a face, which tells me that you did not.
So, Jack and Locke in the beginning is an all-timer. I mean, that is a great scene. We're going to hear Jean Higgins say later that she felt like Matthew Fox really like mellowed out and in his approach to the character in this season. And that's what I was thinking about as I watched that. And I thought it worked so well in contrast to this like stony, scheming Terry O'Quinn. Great scene.
Yeah, I really loved, but you're going to say something else, but let me just flag on this scene. One of the things I loved in addition to Jack, sort of mellowing out, like you said, I also just really feel like Locke is misreading Jack here. Like, maybe it's the only card he's got to play, but he talks about John Locke was a sucker, and he keeps hitting on that, and Jack is like, well, John Locke was the only one of us who ever believed in this place, and I think it's interesting that it seems like, I feel like in the past Locke has won a lot of these scenes, like Locke comes out on top of Jack. I feel like Jack actually... I mean, I know at the end of the episode, Locke says, you're with me now, but I don't feel like at any point he's really convincing Jack because Jack, was brought back to the island by a belief in Locke, and now he's just kind of shitting on the guy. And so again, maybe that's the only card he has to play, but I feel like it's not the right card.
That's interesting because you're right, Jack was brought back to the island by a faith in Locke, and now that Locke is dead, I wonder if there's a little bit of a sense of a martyr or something. Like, I wonder if now that Locke is not here to disappoint Jack, it's much easier for Jack to trust him, because it's Jack's idea of what Locke was rather than Locke, the flawed man himself. Especially when this other entity is standing before him in Locke's body, it really ups the contrast on that, I think. Like, to hear the Man in Black say he wasn't a believer, he was a sucker, and he was the only one dumb enough to believe that he had a purpose, and all of that stuff just really enhances that. Because Jack has never loved Locke, never believed in him wholeheartedly, and we're going to get to a place at the end of season 6 where I think he does, but I think the Man in Black is strengthening that faith just by being such a dick here.
I think you're totally right. And two thoughts. I think the martyr point is a really good point, because I mean, and that's literally why Locke was going to kill himself,
right?
To help convince Jack. I mean, that was his suicide note. I wish you had believed me. It was a guilt trip, is basically what it was. And so I definitely think that the Man in Black here is, playing into that, and like you said, pushing Jack further away. And we get that line in the finale. He says, Jack says to him something along the lines of, you might wear his face, but you're nothing like him. He was a much bigger man than you'll, ever, whatever it was. Like, so yeah, I think it's backfiring. It's going to backfire. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a great scene. We agree on that. You were going to then disagree with me on some other scenes, I think.
Yeah, I didn't love the Jack stuff on the sailboat. I thought he was, I
can't believe you didn't like that scene. Go on.
I didn't think he had enough time or space to really make his case. I mean, it happens so fast when he says to Sawyer,
"Doesn't feel right."
What doesn't feel right?
Leaving the island.
Want to tell me why not?
Because I remember how I felt last time I left. A part of me was missing.
We got pills for that, Doc.
We were brought here because we're supposed to do something, James. And if Locke, if that thing wants us to leave, maybe he's afraid of what happens if we stay.
I just feel like it didn't have enough room to breathe. And I get that Sawyer was not willing to give this even a single second of consideration, but what if he had said that to Kate instead, or somebody who would have been able to draw some more of that out? Because I think to me, it just came off as really clipped and like, okay, Jack has this feeling that he's going to go pursue, but we don't really get to hear any more about that. Especially when he has just, at the end of last episode, said to Hurley, "I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm going to follow you." And now he's jumping off the boat and he's going to go do his own thing again. It felt really sudden to me.
So I actually like that scene, I think, basically for the exact reasons you don't like it. I think that Jack's, ability to now make a decision here was extremely well earned by everything we've seen with Jack this season. I think it's well earned going back to his reaction to Juliet's death, to Lighthouse, sitting outside the lighthouse after smashing the mirrors, to the moment with Richard in the Black Rock letting the dynamite go down, to the decision to, follow Hurley's lead and see where that took him, to the conversation with Locke in this episode where we didn't talk about this bit, but where he, you realize all this time he's still been wondering about seeing the ghost of his dead father on the island.
Right.
I think all of those moments come together so that when Jack has been mulling and mulling and mulling and finally here says, look, if that thing wants us to leave, maybe it's afraid of what happens if we stay. To me, that was a very well-earned moment of Jack finally, reaching some level of resolution here that he's been building towards.
I think you're right about what's going on in Jack's head. I just don't think we get to see enough of it as the viewers, because everything between the conversation with Locke and the sailboat is the execution of a plan. And I just didn't feel like there was any room for that stuff to breathe. And maybe if this had been a Jack sideways episode where we spend more time with him and we draw out some of those contrasts, I see what you're saying. It just didn't land for me the way I would have liked it to.
Totally fair. It landed for me. I think another reason it landed for me was I especially enjoyed Sawyer's role in this. I mean, I also like, by the way, that Jack apologizes for Juliet, which I thought was a long time coming. Sawyer in this scene is just, I like how decisive he is. Like, Sawyer has, everything he's been through, and we've talked about it, Sawyer's been through more shit than just about anybody on the show besides maybe Sayid.
Yeah.
And after everything with Juliet and basically, Sawyer wanting to die, like, he is on a mission. He is getting his friends off this island. He has found renewed purpose, and if Jack's going to get in the way of that, like, I mean, to me, this was like, this would be sort of an earlier show Jack move of bold, decisive leadership. But for good reason, not impulsive, not hot-headed, for the reason that he wants to get his friends off this island, and he's realizing that Jack is potentially going to stop him from doing that. And if that's the case, Jack has got to go. So when he says, "Get off my damn boat," I'm like, Sawyer, I sympathize. Like, I like where Jack's at right now, but I get why you're here, and I sympathize. You must have liked the Desmond Sayid scene, though, with the well. Please tell me you liked that scene.
I did. I also thought it was too short. I wanted more. That's all. Because it was so good. Because it was this serene, kind of edge of the world Desmond, and this, ghost of his former self, Sayid, and we start to see him come back a little bit. And then, of course, they leave it on a cliffhanger. We don't actually get to know whether or not Sayid did it. And, of course, you and I and the listeners know that he didn't. I just wanted more from that.
So it sounds like what you would have preferred is if fewer things were happening in this episode and they could have just focused in on the good stuff.
Absolutely. If we could have just done without all of the Zoe scenes, like you said. I don't think I got a lot out of those. If we had done spent a little bit less time looking at the various maps and walking through the jungle, which is fine. It's classic Lost, but the emotional stakes were so high at this point. And I think we spend too much time walking around and not enough in those one-on-one scenes that you point out are so great.
That's totally fair. I wonder how avoidable that could be at this point, but I mean, it probably just has to do with how they mapped out the season. They definitely created sort of logistical nightmares for themselves, especially in this last year between the two islands and all of the different groups. And like you said, the shifting loyalties.
Yeah. I think there's just a little bit of clutter in this part of season 6 that maybe gets in the way of some of the really good stuff.
Totally fair. I would classify almost anything with Claire on the island as clutter at this point as well. I appreciated her Flash Sideways stories this week. I thought the scene with her and Desmond was interesting, the scene with her and Jack meeting up, but I'm just so sick of on island Claire. I want this to be over.
I actually thought the scene with her and Jack on the island was quite nice. I thought it was a moment of lucidity for Claire where we get to see that, she's still in there, no one is irredeemable, etc.
I got enough of that with Sayid.
I know. The problem now is that we've got to do this with 2 characters and clutter.
But what I loved about Desmond in that sequence in the well was that when Desmond asks him, what makes you think Locke can bring her back, referring to the woman he loved, referring to Nadia, and Sayid says, I died and he brought me back. I feel like the show is making you think there that Desmond is going to say, come on, man, that's ridiculous. You really think he can do that? There's no way he can do that. Desmond doesn't bother trying to convince Sayid that that's impossible. I think he recognizes that that's a losing argument. Instead, he goes straight for the moral compass and asks,
So what will you tell her?
What do you mean?
This woman, when she asks you what you did to be with her again. What will you tell her?
I feel like he just knows that there's something good in Sayid's heart still, and he can read it, and he knows that's going to be the most effective thing he can say to help Sayid and save his own life here. I think it's really, really beautiful and smart by Desmond. And that makes it a great scene, despite what you said.
That's why I wanted it to be 1.5 times as long. But that's... Well, and that, I think, is what makes the Desmond of the Flash Sideways all that much more almost unsettling is that this Desmond is so, it's like he's ascended to this higher plane. It's like he's Zen, you know, he's achieved this ability to just let go and resign himself to the fates. And even when faced with almost certain death, he's able to talk Saeed down, right? And Desmond in the Sideways is also very Zen, but in like a very different way. It's almost this like detached, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I can articulate it well, but I think what Henry and Cusick is doing is so interesting.
I agree, and obviously we've talked with Ian about this, and he had some. It was interesting that he had some disagreements with Jack Bender about how he should play the character, but I agree that he hits all the right notes in both stories and brings like very subtle but significant differences to each of them. I agree with that.
Yeah. The off-island stuff I found, again, I just think there was too much going on. Because I think the scene between Desmond and Claire actually made me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, he's coming on so strong. He's insisting that she come see this lawyer. And eventually she just sighs and is like, fine, I'll go with you if it gets you off my back. And I know he's doing it because he's trying to wake everybody up.
I will say I agree with you about Desmond. The note that I have here is Desmond semi-stalking Claire is just a little bit creepy. So I have that down in my notes. But I find it interesting in the sense of, like, just how Desmond is going about this task he's been given. Like, it also wasn't great that he ran Locke over with his car, but that was fascinating to watch, too.
He really does become kind of a chameleon in those Sideways episodes. Like, he shows up and you really don't know what type of guy you're going to get. And I think the only time we have really seen, like, the real Desmond in the Sideways is the beautiful episode where he meets Penny. I mean, that felt very true. But all of these Desmonds just feel a little bit like he's playing some sort of a character within the character.
And he is.
Which is fine. Yeah.
I don't know. I like the Flash Sideways. I like the Kate Sawyer scene, too, at the police station.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We're on the same page about something, at least.
I like basically all Kate Sawyer scenes.
I mean, it's one of those. I mean, I know they're playing with this here, but the idea of should it have been Kate and Sawyer? He says, "What are the odds that you and I meet again? Like this a week later?" And and almost he says it's almost like someone's trying to put us together. Almost.
It's just the classic Kate and Sawyer. You meet and you recognize your equal, and that's really exciting. Like when she clocks him on.
You know what I think? I think you let me go. Because you went to Australia and you didn't want anyone to know you were there. Should I tell that to the feds when they get here?
She reads him like a book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's that energy that you get when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, I'm challenged by this person, and that's interesting. Oh, one more thing in the Flash Sideways. So Locke and Sun are both rushed into the hospital at the same time. And Sun looks over at Locke and she shouts to Jin what the subtitles translate in English as, "It's him." Does she know who Locke is, or is she waking up?
I think that this is, another one of those, Flash Sideways and main timeline starting to blend together moments where, I think that especially in her... she's been shot, she's being rushed into the hospital. Like we talked about people in these sort of stressful kind of mind-altering moments, things start to bleed together. I think, there's a part of her brain that's recognized, like, oh shit, this is the guy who's trying to kill us or was trying to kill us in real life, and it's kind of flashing over. That's what I think is going on. I think it's a cool moment, actually.
I do too. And that's a place where I think the understatement works in this. The fact that they move on from it so quickly actually works and deepens the mystery, and I liked that here.
How did you feel about the ending, the "you're with me now" moment with Locke and Jack?
It was fine. I don't think either of them believe it.
Huh.
Do you? I mean, Jack certainly doesn't think that he is with the Man in Black. I mean, he knows full well who this is. He just is trying to find and fulfill his purpose. And I don't think the Man in Black thinks that he has won Jack to his cause. I mean, he hasn't won anybody to his cause. Sort of Saeed, sort of Claire. I guess maybe the extras, right? Like maybe Cindy and Emma and company.
Right.
But
the extras who he went to his cause by saying, "Join me or I'm going to kill you," as a cloud of black smoke, which he can't do with the candidates.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a fine line. It just doesn't, I don't think either of them believe it.
I agree, and I kind of think that's why that moment falls a little flat.
Well, and I think if anything was going to convince Jack to do the Man in Black's bidding, it was this idea of we all need to leave together. Like, that's something that Locke lays out in the opening scene, and it's the only moment where Jack seems sympathetic, I think. But now Jack has left everyone behind. And he is flying solo for the first time since we've known him. And that is maybe where, like, if the Man in Black had any leverage over Jack, it was the leverage of, you care about these people, and if you think that you're helping them, I can get you to do my bidding. But Jack seemingly has let that go. And right when he jumps off the sailboat and decides he is going to go in pursuit of whatever, Jacob has in store for him, whatever the island has in store, and just let everybody else leave on their own.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that in terms of Jack kind of abandoning his responsibility, or what he always felt was his responsibility to the group. Like, that's a double-edged sword. Like, on the one hand, that's kind of sad that he's, given up on these people. On the other hand, he's, if he feels like he's got to do what he's got to do, his first responsibility is to himself, and that's something that Jack's never been good at accepting. So I don't know. I don't know if I like that or don't like that.
It's just different.
It's just different.
But it is a very Locke impulse, right? To strike out on your own, and not everybody else be damned, but follow if you want, don't follow if you don't want, but I have charted my own course.
He literally did. He jumped off a boat. Sawyer says to him, he uses the Locke expression. He says, if you want to take a leap of faith, do it. And that's literally what he does. He leaps off the boat. Time for Jean Higgins, you think?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we had Jean on the podcast way back in season 3, which was actually the last season we recorded when we could still interview folks in person before COVID-19. But you were able to meet Jean in person again to record this.
It was great. Went over to her house. We sat in her office where, as I'll discuss in the interview, there's all sorts of interesting TV memorabilia on her walls. It was great sitting in her office and chatting Lost. What could be better?
Let's talk about season 6.
Jean, thank you so much for being back with us on the Hatch podcast.
Nice to see you again.
So for those who may not have listened to our first conversation a couple of years back, just to sort of reintroduce you, tell us a little bit, just briefly, what your role was on Lost.
I started as producer, worked my way up last season to executive producer. My job was essentially to pull all the elements together to make the show. So essentially, Damon and Carlton would send the script. I would do a very quick preliminary breakdown even before the assistant directors did their very complex breakdown. And it was everything from working with casting directors to make sure they knew what schedules were, doing deals for cast, finding the crew, making sure everything worked, all the various pieces, everything that you need for each specific scene.
So basically everything physically about putting Lost together, that was you?
Yes.
You, I just noticed as we're talking here, and I can't help but mention it, you've got your Directors Guild of America award for the pilot of Lost on the wall behind us, which is pretty cool.
It is. Yeah. It was nice to get, yes.
Yeah. So that means, unlike Jack Bender, you were actually involved from the pilot, like you were there at the very beginning.
I was essentially the first person into Hawaii. Went in by myself, flew in, started having meetings at the top of the Ilokai Hotel in the room where I was living, and was the last one out.
Okay. So let's flash forward to season 6. So you finish season 5. Juliet explodes the bomb at the end. The screen goes to white. Everyone in the world is wondering what's going to happen next after that. What do you remember about just preparing to make that last season? Like, how did that get started? Like, what was, what's your recollection of just like, you've done season 5 and now it's time for season 6? Where are your heads all at?
Well, everyone knew it was the last season. So we all knew going into the last season that there wasn't going to be another one. So everyone was, how can we make this fabulous? How can we make it really wonderful? How can we figure out a way to stretch and go and above and beyond what we've done before?
I guess I'm curious what the sort of big set pieces or the big things you really had to prep for going into that season. Because the things that are in my mind, at the beginning they spend a lot of time at the temple, and then there's the Flash Sideways story. What were the big pieces you kind of had to start pulling together as you got ready?
Building the temple, building airplanes.
Yeah.
The fight for the finale, the fight on top of a cliff, where now I look back at it and going, what the hell were we doing? But it was really safe and, not really safe, very carefully choreographed to be safe. And I look at it now and go, oh my God, we pulled off some of the most amazing things.
Yeah. Well, I want to try to go chronological if we can, but what stands out the most in your mind is the most amazing thing that you pulled off in that season?
I think maybe the fight on the top of the cliff.
Yeah. Because
that was a location where you literally had to send people in. You put pitons in the rock.
What are pitons?
The stuff mountain climbing.
Mountain, okay,
right?
Yeah.
And then there's a guide, so everybody would go in, one case of equipment in one arm, holding onto the rope on the other arm, because it was a gentle slope down to a good 150 foot cliff into the ocean. Until you got to the area where we had the fight.
Yeah.
And then we made rain, so they were fighting on water on top of a cliff. We had multiple cameras. We were literally hanging people in harnesses over the edge of the cliff, shooting up at them. And I remember that day because it was a 2-unit day. So the second unit director was doing the fight, and Jack Bender was doing a big scene in the valley at the ranch. So, and we wanted a lot of aerials for both scenes. So I did the helicopter shooting, and we choreographed the entire production so that I could take off, fly to Kualoa Ranch, do all the aerials Jack wanted for his scene, then fly to the other side of the island and come in over the ocean and lift up on the cliff and reveal them fighting on top of the cliff. So one helicopter day, multiple uses.
Wow. That was for aerial shots of both sequences.
Yeah.
Wow. And was it, you were kind of joking about this, but was it safe on the cliff? I've heard the story about the accidental stabbing, right? Didn't Terry pulled the wrong knife once and accidentally stabbed Matthew Fox for real?
Yes, but it wasn't a big one.
Right, yeah. but was it, that just sounds... How did you make that all safe? What did that consist of?
You have endless safety meetings.
Yeah.
Okay? So that everybody knows exactly what's going on. You have... you make sure you have medics everywhere. You have safety spotters. I've never had an accident.
Yeah.
Ever. And one of the things that we had to do is because the entire crew was there shooting the fight on top of the cliff and on, it was ocean on one side, but back into the trees and hillside on another. So we would have to radio ahead and go, okay, we're coming, hide. So that the only people as we pulled in were the actors.
That's funny.
So you didn't see all the rest of the crew there shooting the actors.
That's funny. What about you mentioned the airplane, because you had to do all that stuff with the airplane.
Well, I'd almost forgotten about the airplane until I went back to sort of refresh myself. And one of the areas where we were at Police Beach, which is on the North Shore, which is where the survivor camp was, which was a wonderful location that Kamehameha Schools owned and rented to us. It was an old landing strip left over from World War II, part of it, right? And so when Lapidus has got the plane and they're going to take off again and everything, we literally already had a landing strip. Right
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I mean,
most of the time we just parked the company there, right? Because it was this big flat area and we could put all the trailers and trucks there. But
I mean, you'd used planes at various points in the show earlier. Was this a new plane that you then had to go and get for the last year, or were you able to reuse?
No, we literally built it.
Oh, you built that airplane?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, well, Zach Grobler built it. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Why not just go find another plane in the graveyard out in the Mojave?
Because we were in Hawaii.
You were in Hawaii.
And having shipped the first plane over.
Yeah.
Right. And at that point, by the last season, we had an amazing construction crew. They could make and build anything. And it was literally, we needed to do certain things. We needed to be certain configurations. So literally over the years, we had built a couple of mock-ups. The only thing I would ship over would be the cockpit section because all the instrumentation was just too much for us to do.
Okay.
But, so yeah, and we wanted to be able to move it.
Yeah. I assume at the end when it takes off from the island, you did not actually take off an airplane there. That must have been...
No, that was visual effects.
That was visual effects. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, so let's back up to the beginning of the season, because you mentioned this earlier, that the temple is the big new set at the beginning of the 6th season. Mm-hmm. The whole first six episodes, a lot of it takes place there. Talk about building the temple, because it's not like anything that was on Lost previously.
It was really interesting, because Zach Grobler, our production designer, was so specific. He did such research. I can tell you every engraving in that temple is actually accurate, makes sense. If you're a scholar, you can read it. It's correct.
Are they like Egyptian hieroglyphs?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And the temple itself was on stage. And then parts of the exterior were, trying to think, they were back up in the same area where we had all the cages for season 4. Different part of that.
Oh, the cages at like
location.
the other season 3 cages where Jack, Kate, and Sawyer are trapped. Okay.
Forever. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. And the temple it was a huge build. Yeah, it took up all the stage and some of the outside as well.
Okay. I mean, so just like when some of the actors in season 6, I mean, talking about the temple, Hiroyuki Sanada was an interesting addition to the cast. Were you involved in
Oh, he was lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What was he like? Because he's so different. I mean, he's such an amazing actor, but he's not like anyone else on that show.
No, he was a wonderful human being. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember talking with April Webster about how we could
casting director,
absolutely,
right?
yes,
yeah,
how we could absolutely make it happen. And as I recall, it was going to be a couple of episodes, and then, as with everything on Lost, it tended to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you really wanted to get Hiroyuki on the show?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there? I mean, one of the really fun things about season 6, I think, is also all of the old cast that you get to bring back. You bring back Ian Somerhalder and Harold Perrineau and Maggie Grace and all that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yeah. Tell me about
because
that.
By that point, everybody was on. If they had finished their run with Lost, they were all on other shows. So I had to schedule so that we could have all of these people in one place at one time.
Oh, you're talking about at the very end.
At the very end. And I had to deal with every other actor's show and work it out with them as to what their schedules were and what our schedules were. And, for example, I remember at the time Liz Montgomery was doing a show in Vancouver. Ian, of course, was doing Vampire Diaries in Atlanta. Atlanta is like a 10-hour flight to Hawaii, you know. They came from all over the country. And I had to set up these are the 48 hours where we're shooting this, and everybody's got to be here.
That sounds like a pain in the ass.
Every other producer on every other show, and they weren't all ABC network. They were every network, you know. Everybody had to agree to it. And then it was, oh, God forbid, we hit weather. We hit something that changed that schedule. And it worked, but it was crazy.
Who was the hardest person to get back?
Actually, I think it was Liz.
Who's Liz? You mentioned the name. I don't...
Juliet.
Oh, Juliet. Elizabeth Mitchell, not Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, Elizabeth Mitchell. Okay.
Yeah. Only because her show was very worried that they weren't going to have her back in time.
Was that V at the time?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
She was doing V. And I got, look, I've promised, I've done this before. I have never not sent an actor back in time. You will have her back in time. Interestingly enough, they didn't believe me. They sent a charter plane to pick her back up. The charter plane had issues, and had they just let me send her back, she would have been there earlier.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, but it was, Ian was great, Maggie was great. Yeah, everybody was.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
Was there anyone that you couldn't get back that you wanted to be there?
That just got them all.
Got them all. I mean, the whole other thing about the last year is that you're doing those flash sideways instead of the flash back or the flash forward. I'm curious. Did that affect? Was it your job at all different, or was there anything unique or different for you about making those flash sideways rather than the flashbacks or flash forwards, or was it pretty much the same process?
No, same process, essentially. Yeah. It's just, you have to make sure that you're tracking everything constantly. You know, it's like, okay, time-wise, are we here? Are we there? Is everything appropriate? Is everything right? Because especially on a show like Lost, which sort of invented Easter eggs, you know, it's like, did we drop something? Did we blow something? So if anything, you just sort of had to really buckle down and make sure that everything was very specific.
So you were probably working a lot with, the guy who kept the Lost Bible, whose name I'm forgetting.
Greg.
Greg Nations.
Best script coordinator I have ever worked with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in those Flash Sideways, you had a lot going on. I mean, and all of those storylines have to come together perfectly at the end. There's probably a lot to juggle.
Yeah. But I remember talking with Greg once, and I went, I need you to look up this for me. I don't even remember what it was, but it was something. And it was fairly early on. But Greg kept a Bible for everything. Every name that Sawyer called somebody, there was a Bible for. Every, this, and this. And yet, even with all of that, a lot of times we would be sitting in production meetings or concept meetings going, okay, if we do this and this and this, and where were we then there? And it would be a crew member who'd go, no, this is exactly what we did. And we'd pull the footage, and sure enough, they were right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. This is a did you know type of question, but when you were filming all those sideways storylines, did you and Jack at least have an understanding of what was really going on here, that this was the afterlife, or were you kind of filming this stuff blind until you got that finale script?
Yes, we knew. Did we publicize and talk about it? No.
Okay, so you guys knew when you were doing it, but the rest of the crew and the cast didn't.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because when you watch it back, it feels like, oh, of course, this is the afterlife, and it all kind of lines up. So it makes me think that somebody who was making this had to know what was going on, or it wouldn't have worked so well.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Damon knew after season 1 where it was going.
Yeah.
He didn't share it until, as you got much further along.
Until he had to, yeah.
Really, there were only ever 2 leaks from the show, about the show.
Remind me.
They both came from the mainland side.
Yeah.
They never came from the
You guys
side.
didn't leak?
Never. Not one cast, not one crew.
I think I've heard before, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you were filming the church sequence at the end, wasn't there like a lot of sort of efforts or subterfuge to like make sure that didn't leak out and to kind of throw people off the scent? I feel like I've read a little bit about that.
There was some, because by then it was like, whoa, what is everybody doing here,
Yeah.
But nobody said anything.
Nobody said anything?
Never.
What about the scene with, I assume you must have been in on it, but I've read that the scene with Jack and Christian, where they talk before Jack walks out into the church, I think I've read that hardly anybody knew what was going on in there. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, it was very small. It was sort of only those who need to be there.
Did you get to watch them film that sequence?
Yeah, it was great.
That must have been powerful with those two guys in that room together.
Yeah.
One episode, or a couple episodes in particular, I want to ask about in the last year, Ab Eterno, the Richard Alpert, big flashback episode where you go back to the Canary Islands in the 1800s. The black rock crashing on the island. What do you remember about prepping for and filming that episode? Because it's such a tentpole of the show. Rain. Yeah.
They always wanted it raining on that show. Tons of rain.
And that makes your life difficult.
There were times I would call up and I'd go, guys, do we really need all this rain? Carlton would go, Gene, when something bad happens on Lost, it rains. I went, yeah, I know. Just it would be nice if we could. But we make rain. And yes, on that one, we shot in a place out on the North Shore at a big ranch. And the big, long drive. Huge rain setup. And then, of course, the guy who played Richard Alpert is just delightful.
Well, Nestor's awesome.
Nestor is wonderful. Yeah, he was wonderful, and it was fun because it was a whole different era, and you're looking for Spanish architecture in Hawaii. Good luck, and this is we got as close as we could, and I think it worked, but yeah, it was, and I remember Tucker Gates shot that.
Yeah, we talked with Tucker about it, actually. Yeah. He loved making that show.
Yeah. Tucker was always, I've told this to his face, so I'm not talking out of school. Tucker is difficult, but you don't care because it always comes out so good.
Yeah?
Yeah. He really pushes it.
Yeah, pushes it in what way? What do you mean?
I need.
Well, I guess that's why you want him for the best episodes, then.
Yeah. No, he's a great guy. And then, of course, there's the ship interior.
Yeah, the ship interior must have been something.
Yeah.
I mean, you spend like 15 minutes of the actual episode just in that ship.
Yes. Well, we had built a ship interior season 1.
Okay.
For sort of like just a little flavor of it. And I remember because at the time I had a Polaroid of a couple of skeletons and chains from that. And I grabbed the Polaroid and I wrote on the back, Jack, so nice to finish season 1 with you. Here's a picture of us. And gave it to him, right? Like a couple of skeletons. Just
that was very funny. You did that after season 1.
I did that at the end of season 1. And then we essentially rebuilt it, but much bigger for this season.
Oh, so you didn't just keep around that old set?
Well, not for 6 years.
Okay.
No. There's I will tell you that I used to fold sets a lot. There was the lab. I remember I would always ask the guys, are we ever coming back to this? Can I strike it or do I fold?
You would ask Damon and Carlton that.
Yeah, meaning, do we just take it apart, set it aside, and put it back up? Because, of course, being in Hawaii in a small stage, space was at a premium. So, and once they told me I could strike this set, we were never going back. And when I was building it for the 3rd time, I just went, that's it. I don't trash anything.
Yeah.
But that was after.
Right. That was after you'd already struck the ship.
Yeah.
Okay, so you rebuilt the ship.
Yeah.
It's a good set. It's a really good set. People love Ab Eterno. I think most people love the finale. Some people don't. But across the sea, if there's one episode that a lot of people really, really don't like, it's probably that one. And so
because it takes you so far away from what Lost was, and yet I know that they were setting up for the mythology.
Yeah, and they kind of had to do it.
Yeah. So it's like when you're reading a book and it's like, oh, here's a footnote. You have to read it for the rest of it to make sense, but it sort of stopped the through flow in a way.
I think it held up. The episode held up better than I remembered it when I rewatched it recently. I liked it a lot better than I had the first time. But the 2,000 years in the past is interesting. Anyway, move on from that.
Yeah, because it was sort of how do you accept the man in black's been alive all this time,
Yeah.
And,
what was it like having, I don't know, what did you think of having Terry? Terry's so good, but he's playing a different character that last year.
Well,
what was that?
Yeah, in a way, but wasn't that where Terry's character was going all along?
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Going to that kind of dark place?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I've never heard that idea. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, no, he always was like, okay, now I'm in charge. And it was always very subtle, you know. Jack, the doctor's over here. He's the erstwhile leader. And Terry's just sort of going this way all the way through the season.
Is there anything that stands out in your mind just thinking about working with any of the, anything that any members of the cast did or stuff, just questions people had or anything with particular actors on that last year? Just because there's some great performances and there's some people who do very different stuff than they did before. I'm just curious if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, well, let's start with Terry.
Yeah.
We had finished shooting. I get a call. Of course, by then, most everybody's living on the island for the most part.
You finished shooting what, the whole show?
The whole show.
Okay.
And the part where Locke falls off the cliff and it says the waves are lapping at him and the whole thing, and we need a close-up. And I'm going, uh-oh. I went looking for the picture, but I can't find it. It's probably on some phone I trashed somewhere. But anyway, we take Terry. And we literally strap him to a cliff, and the waves are crashing over him. And we're up on a cliff, shooting straight down at him. And we tied him off. But had it not held, he would have just washed into the ocean.
Oh, my God.
And, I mean, the guy was so game for everything. So, I mean, Jack's back cutting in L.A., everybody's going. And so it's like, hey, guys, we need a shot of Terry. Let's go.
Just for that one close-up, you dangled him off a cliff.
Oh, no, I stretched him out on a ledge. He was laying there dead. With waves crashing on top of him. Yeah.
I know that shot. Yeah. So you had already gotten the shot from a distance after he fell, but you needed the close-up.
We got the shot from the fight where he goes off the edge, but then we went around the corner to another place, like, a month later.
You needed him lying there.
They wanted a close up.
I remember that shot. Is that the last thing you shot? Do you think you shot anything else after that?
I think it is.
Okay. I was going to ask what was the last shot, and that's funny that's what it is.
Yeah, it is the last one.
Yeah. Anything stand out in your mind from just working with Matthew that last year? Because it's really his show. I mean, season 6 is his time to shine. He got the Emmy nom for that year finally.
Yep. It was hard because they weren't going to give the actors because it was such an ensemble cast. It wasn't like, okay, here's the lead actor and everybody else is supporting or everything, So it made it hard for the actors in terms of awards. But, yeah, Matthew mellowed that last year, It was a lot about the work. It was good.
Mellow, what do you mean?
Matthew was very spiky. I remember talking with Jack once about, when you talk to Matthew, it's got to be a different way. I said he builds his character differently. And because Jack started out as an actor, right? But actors approach things differently, and Matthew's very methodical.
Very methodical.
Very methodical. I mean, I will give you an example. I used to do all the ADR with all the actors.
That's
right?
substituting dialogue in
Substituting
later.
dialogue. So you bring the actors come in, you're in the room, you run the film, and they essentially lip sync to themselves. It could be because a plane went over, a car backfired, or something. They want to change a line slightly. They want a slightly different take on the line. This was an episode where both Matthew and Terry O'Quinn cried. Okay? At different times, different scenes. For various reasons, both those scenes needed to be looped. Okay, ADR looping, same thing. Matthew comes in, storming around, screaming, yelling, I realize he's working himself up to the state where he has to get to cry. Not pleasant getting there, but you just sort of sit back and I'm calling Dana Carlton, I can't do this, right? And I'm sitting there going, yeah, okay, yeah. So, and we finally, I go, you want to call him now? No, just get it done, right? So we do it, but it takes half an hour to get to that point where he does it and he's out the door and upset. But that's okay. We got what we needed, right? Right after Matthew, Terry is scheduled. Terry has to come in. I remember he had gone up to the gates. I believe it was his father's house in the car. They wouldn't let him in. And he cries. And having just survived the Matthew experience, I'm going, Terry, I'm really sorry. You got to cry. It's like, Terry looks at me and goes, Jean, it just sounds. Walks in and lays it down. And there you have the difference. Both of them terrific performances, but how you get there, I will say that Matthew's process, I think, was agonizing.
Interesting. But that last year, you're saying he mellowed.
He mellowed, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I am an amateur judge of acting. I thought he was at his best that last year. I really did.
Yeah, I think it seemed like he was just letting it happen more than trying to direct it so much himself.
Interesting. And it kind of lines up with where his character's at that last year, finally, learning to let go. So maybe he was journeying along with the character.
Maybe David finally got to him.
This is silly, but it never occurred to me that all 24 or whatever of those actors who had to come be in the same place on the same day to shoot the church scene all had other jobs in a wide variety of places, and somebody had to make sure that all of those tickets were booked, and that sounds exhausting. So kudos to Jean.
Seriously, that's a logistical feat that I had also never thought about. You know what else I really liked was her description of Across the Sea. I mean, we'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks, but she said it's like you're reading a book and it's like, here's a footnote. You have to read it for the rest of it to make sense. And, I think that's mostly true. They probably could have gotten away with not explaining quite so much if they'd really wanted to. But yeah, it's interesting that even the person making the show kind of feels like that. It's like she knows it's a distraction. She knows it's a sidetrack, but she felt like, okay, we really needed to do this so that you would get the rest of it. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to that.
We'll dig into this, I'm sure, in great detail when we watch Across the Sea in a few weeks. But if that had been episode 6 of this season or episode 8, just this third to last episode, the stakes are so high. Anyway, we'll have plenty to talk about when we get there.
But first, we'll be back next week with The Candidate, which, the Candidate, big one, but yeah, it's a lot.
We will have the rest of this conversation with Jean for you then, where we will get into a whole bunch more finale-specific stuff.
In the meantime, as we barrel towards the end of the show here, if you haven't yet, follow us on social media. Let us know what you think. We're on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, also facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
Give us a call and leave us your hot take. We are stocking them up for the remaining episodes. But if you have anything to share about Season 6 in general or anything tied to a specific episode, you can call us at 9546-DHARMA. If you are outside the U.S., just use the country code 1 in front of that number.
Rate us and review us if you don't mind as well. We're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, pretty much everywhere you can find podcasts. We are there, so please share your feedback.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we will be back in 2 weeks.
Namaste.